So, Mr. Stephen Davenport, thank you very much for joining us for the Happy Smart City podcast. Very exciting work that you do. I was particularly inspired by your work in financial literacy, and of course your experience as an investment professional and an investment manager, an active manager, and obviously your experience also as the former president of the Chartered Financial Analyst Association's the society,
Atlanta Society
in Atlanta. So that to me, things that really stand out. And I was really honored that you would consider to join us here for the podcast. So welcome.
Well, sure, I'm happy to be here. It's I think the work you're trying to do with smart cities and the work some of the other speakers you've got looks like a great podcast and some really good ideas being shared.
Well, coming from you, it really means a lot. So thank you for that. So if we may, I'd like to start with your first question, which is, what is your current occupation?
I'm a director of alternative investments at Circa Capital, which is a small minority-owned registered investment advisor here in Atlanta. And most of my career, I've worked for trust banks, State Street Bank and Trust, Fleet Trust, the Wilmington Trust, and SunTrust. And in all of those cases, working with a big bank and working as a fiduciary, it was interesting, but I always felt that there was something different to do by being a registered advisor and working with a small advisor like Decatur. It's very interesting to see how they built a business over the last 20 years to African American, run a CPA and run a CFA. And I think that when you see their business and how they run it, it's a lot more of what I enjoyed doing versus working for a larger bank. So I think that part of what you do in your career is you have various experiences. And when I changed my careers, I was an engineer in undergrad, similar to yourself. And I thought the technical knowledge was the key, and mathematical models and industrial engineering were what I was going to do the rest of my life. And it seemed like that was going to go that path, but then I kind of realized that the world of markets was what I really wanted to do, was to work in the markets and to figure out how the models that describe the price action really gets established and how it gets used. So I went back, got my master's in finance at Boston College, and then I started studying for the CFA. And I think the CFA designation gave me that global perspective and that kind of stamp of approval for people who said, who is this engineering and math guy? And now with a master's in finance and the CFA, I was able to focus my energy on something that I've been interested in my whole life, which was derivatives. And so I help families with concentrated positions, meaning if a family worked at a company or bought shares and owns most of their wealth in one stock, I help them with educating and understanding the risk, and then help them diversify using derivatives. So that might have been a little longer answer than you were expecting, but that's where I am and what I'm doing now.
Yeah, as long as people get clarity. So the next one is, and by the way, I think I also left out the fact that, yes, so, your experience with trust companies is also very phenomenal. I think anyone who just takes a quick snapshot of your LinkedIn, can agree. Very phenomenal career. And then the next one is, what is ESG? Why should people value this subject? And how can the average citizen begin their journey in ESG?
I think ESG, when I think about wealth management and what's happened over the last 20 years, when we went through the financial, the technology kind of 2000 boom, there was a realization that people wanted more than just returns. They wanted to start to incorporate the idea of planning and other aspects into your life and how you have your money and your returns and work towards certain goals, whether it was investing in private equity, whether it was investing in private real estate. How does your wealth line up with your goals? And then I think in the last 3 or 4 years or 5 years, I'd say that the market and individuals have started to say, not only do I want my values to be expressed in how I use my money, but where I use my money. And I think that ESG focuses on the 3 main aspects of how companies are run. Are they doing things in a way that is sustainable with the environment? Are they doing things that are aligned with the society? And are they doing things in a way that has good governance? And a lot of these things you would think would be standard for how a business would operate. The marketplace used to say that companies operate to satisfy shareholders. And that idea has been around for 20 or 30 years. And I think what people are realizing is the shareholder interest isn't really the full interest that companies should be following. They should really think about stakeholders. And stakeholders include employees, include the environment that the company operates in, and include the community where they operate. So I think that move away from shareholder value to stakeholder value is in the process of happening. And I would say that if you think about it, I think of the one word that describes ESG as sustainability. We all want things to last in a way and get better. And I think that in that way, sustainability is something that all of us can try to achieve. You know, how are you in terms of recycling and using, how do you use carbon, and how do you do things in a way that has as little impact on the world as you can, while still, you know, trying to be the best you can. I think there's a lot of thoughtful work being done, and I think that as individuals, we can look at how we consume, we can look at how we invest, and also look at how we support people and politicians that have the value of sustainability in what they're trying to do. So I think individuals have 3 main ways that they can impact this ESG and sustainability. 1, their own consumption. 2, the investments that they make. And 3 would be, how do they participate in their community, either volunteering or helping to elect people who have similar goals and objectives. There's a great book called Green Swans by John Elkington.
I was just about to suggest that you share a little bit about that, because I did have a look at the book after you suggested it. So I'm glad you still have that in mind.
Yeah, I mean, part of what I did previously in my career was focus on investing in derivatives. And now that I've been doing charity work with our Foundation on Financial Literacy, I focus on thoughtfully moving the industry forward. And that's how I think about what all of us can do to try to thoughtfully move whatever we're doing forward in a way that makes it better than it was before we started. And I look at Green Swans by Elkington, and what he's saying is, if we start to really focus our energy on this, and we start to get people who will invest well or who will focus on the right things, this could steamroll, and we could see, just like we see black swans in the markets, we could see green swans where some of these ideas come together so quickly that we find ourselves not only living a fuller life, but also living a more sustainable life in the world. And I think that we need to think bigger and always think, the people, if we said a century ago, we would be, where we are with electricity, where we are with water and food and agriculture. I don't think anybody could have imagined 100 years ago. And I say, we need to start thinking for that next 100 years. And I think ideas like this, with the Green Swan, are a key for us to try to stop thinking about the problem of today and 2 years from today and 5 years from today and have a longer time horizon. If there's one thing that the CFA teaches, it's this concept that the longer your time horizon is, the more likely your returns will be higher. Therefore, if you want to have good returns, you need to start to think in terms of those longer horizons. And that's what I think, when I look at what's happening today with Reddit and what's happening with the use of options and all the meme stocks, I just feel like it's really coming to an extreme point of short-termism. And that short-termism, we know, is not usually a good result. When you think in this real short term, you're not thinking as holistically as you could. And I believe that that's a symptom of, I believe we move in a pendulum. And I think when sometimes we'll move in the pendulum, we'll go pretty far to the extreme. And I feel like that's where we might be today with some of these Bitcoin and some of the ideas of some of these SPACs and some of the NFTs. And I believe that we should be starting to think much more long term. And I like what Elkington does with his allusion to the swan analogy in markets and thinking about a green swan. So I believe that ESG is here to stay. And I think that everyone should start to think about, 5 years ago, I was, working with some advisors at State Street, and, they have an ETF called SHE. They invest in companies who have more women on their boards, who have more policies that are pro-women. And I think that those type of concepts, when you think about markets and why people succeed or fail, it's because of selling at the bottom. It's because of buying too much at the top. And so, in my mind, if we can do one thing from a behavioral aspect for clients, it's to get them to smooth out and not make extreme decisions. And the way that you do that is for people to have more faith, more trust in their companies that they invest in. And I look at that coming from, if you believe in some of the values the companies are exhibiting, then you're less likely to sell that company when things get tough. And if we can avoid some of those bad sales, we can be more consistent with how we allocate money as we go up. I think you end up owning things that you really believe in. And I think that belief will tend to lead to a longer time horizon, and that longer time horizon will lead to better results.
Fantastic. That, I think if we stopped right here, that would be it, because it's really about values, right? And to a very large extent, I think, even from my own observations in a very short time, I mean, obviously compared to you, I'm in my cocoon here. But, having looked at some people who've, shared their stories, whether it's on LinkedIn or even on YouTube, people talk about how they leave their jobs simply because there's no alignment. They do things, obviously, at the very beginning. For most middle-class people, it's about wanting to have a good job, have enough to retire, send your kids through college. But then, once you're in the thick of things, a couple of decades down the line, you start to really think about your legacy. And it really is sort of a holistic exercise. And people are really coming to that realization that you don't have a job and then have your home and then have XYZ. everything is really sort of baked in together. And if you get that wrong, it leads to all of the mental health issues that we have today, because people are just depressed because the core structures are not in sync. So I can agree with that 100%.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I find that the financial literacy work, I mean, we'll talk about it in a bit, but I personally got into volunteering and after I had cancer about 11 years ago, 12 years ago. And I looked at my life, and I had a home, and I had a wife, and I had 3 beautiful kids, and I felt like I had been, a good son, good brother. And the one thing that was lacking is, what have I done for the world around me or the community? And so I realized if I got through this cancer, I would dedicate myself more to trying to help others. And so I did that through mentoring students at the CFA, and then I got involved in the managing of the CFA Society. And then when I was president, I decided that, we have this extra capital on our balance sheet. Why don't we put something in place that's a long-lasting asset that we can invest for the long term instead of a short-term cash reserve? Why don't we have a foundation that's dedicated to financial literacy in the community? Because we have this human capital of 1,600 members with 20 years average experience and 2 degrees. How do I take what the Atlanta community is short on knowledge about finance that helps the average person? How do I channel all of the knowledge and experience and resources towards helping the other? And that's what I've been engaged in for the last 5 years. But I think it gets back to your original point, which is, are we doing good things for others? And how does that manifest itself in your values and ultimately your investments and ultimately how you're able to live your life?
Fantastic. All right. So first of all, again, I mean, congratulations on the battle with the cancer. I'm really honored to have you here. And just a little note, I actually lost my mom to cancer. And some of the things that, I'm doing today have been inspired by her to a very large extent, because she was a champion for orphans and vulnerable children. So she used to travel, around the world raising funds for orphans and vulnerable children. And she's also contributed quite a lot to policy, for supporting these children, mainly in the Southern African region. So, yeah.
I mean, I think, Tia, we all stand on the shoulders of those who came before us. I mean, I wouldn't be able to do what I do without my father and my mother and my uncles and my aunt. And just to show one connection, that I had an uncle who was a professor of logic. He was a priest. And he went in the 60s to Nairobi, Kenya, and he set up a seminary there to help develop candidates for the priesthood in Africa. And so when I think of today going to Africa and trying to help develop things in 2021, and I think of him going there in 1965, and he talked about landing on a dirt runway in Nairobi. It takes courage to try to do something new. When you grow up in Dorchester and you go to school in Providence, and to travel halfway around the world to help missionary, the students of the priesthood. Yeah. I think that's what inspired me and others to, like we're going to fall and we're going to make mistakes, but boy, a lot of other people have had a lot harder row and have done a lot of inspirational things that give us courage, right?
So true. So true. Okay, so our next one is, how can world leaders integrate ESG into their nations and corporations? Also, what immediate action would you prescribe for the embedding of ESG into the modern education system?
Sure. I mean, I think about leaders as having to make a choice about, and in the investment industry, really the choice is, do we include companies that may not be doing things perfectly but are getting better, or do we exclude? And I think that when I think about ESG, it started out as mainly an exclusionary issue. I was at State Street, and there was, people there were Sisters of Charity, I believe, who wouldn't invest in sin stocks or gun manufacturers. And then they started to expand, and they wouldn't invest in General Electric because they had environmental problems with their environmental policies or factories. And I think that it started out as an exclusionary process. And I think that what we've learned is that we need to work with companies. So if you don't own the share, then they have really no interest in talking to you. So we are at Decatur are part of the UNPRI, and as a signatory of that, we are negotiating with Apple to try to help them improve the working conditions for the miners of some of the materials that are in the iPhone. So
the cobalt.
Cobalt, yeah. And so I think that when we think about this, everybody has their own personal influence in making ESG happen, right? I mean, whether it's recycling, whether it's driving an EV, whether it's on social media, on the ideas and the people you support, I think everybody has a place to play, a place to make a difference. I think that as we think larger about institutions, I think we need to make our pensions and our 401ks contain investment options that allow people to choose things that are more sustainable. And I think that will be the next, having 401ks, just like you have an index choice, I think you're going to need to have an ESG choice. And I think that will allow a lot of those 35% of the population who have 401ks to speak and to express themselves in ways that are aligned to their values. I think that pensions are going in that direction. Circa Capital manages large cap growth and their international strategy and our two quality dividend strategies with an ESG overlay using data from True Value. So I think that organizations are starting to realize this is coming and how do we change? And there's some organizations that are greenwashing, saying they're really ESG, but they're really not doing it quite as completely or honestly as they should. Just like any strategy, I think you have to do your homework and try to make sure that what people say they're doing is what they're actually doing. And I think that's where this gets more complicated. But I would like to see leaders step forward and do the things they can for their employees and the communities at large that emphasize the idea of sustainability. When you mention education, I think of the U.S. system where we have basically kind of four corners of our education system, right? History, English, math, and science. And I think that we could make the learning of those topics much more of an applied exercise. Like, could we have, someone calculate their carbon footprint? Could we have a project where we looked at a family's footprint? Could we look at a community's or a county's footprint? Could we look at how the transportation choices in a city would impact? I think there's a lot of application where math and science, I think you could create problems that have a sustainability or an ESG part of that education that would be natural. I think from a history standpoint, what is the history of going and thinking about sustainability? What societies and groups or religions have talked about sustainability throughout their history? And then I think writing in English, I think people should express their values in this area, just like we talk about what do you want to be when you grow up. Why don't we talk about what do you want the world to be when you grow up? And I think that writing and expressing and talking about these ideas in history and talking about these ideas from a scientific physics, chemistry perspective, and a math perspective would be easy to incorporate into our education system. I think that online, there's so much opportunity for people to create what I'll call best practices in this area, so that educators could use ideas and exercises and share them with their community, and then they could become much more commonplace. And getting them added to educational criteria would, to me, be a natural step. When we were building our financial literacy videos, we got this concept of edutainment, because I think that when we look at things that are effective, they're able to keep people's interest for a longer period of time. I think that the idea of rows of students looking at a chalkboard is not going to be the education of the future. The education of the future is going to be some type of interactive online engagement. And I think that we need it, just like we want the concept of sustainability to grow. We're going to have to think better about how we educate people, because it's a limited resource exercise, right? I would love financial literacy to be a part of all of America, but it takes resources. So if you do a good job with your resources and how you allocate them to help the cause, that serves as an example for others to do a similar way, and then an idea can grow, much faster. So as an example, we boost our videos on Facebook. And so we identify 18 to 24-year-olds in the Atlanta and Athens area, and we push our videos on different budgeting and other ideas out to those people. And so for $100 a month, we touch about 8,500 individuals. And so to me, $100 is a lot of money, and I don't want to waste it. And so when I think about getting an instructor to sit and talk to 5 students, his time is worth money in the space. And I look at that $100 and think about leveraging technology. And that, to me, is the key for how education is going to change with ESG in the future.
The scale is just phenomenal, what you get for $100.
Yeah, I got one story, if you don't mind. So we had a video on spending, and the video on spending got someone to like it and share it. And I looked at the individual, and he was a 26-year-old African-American from Athens. And I went to his profile, and he's a minister in church of Ethiopian refugees in Athens. And he wrote, "I think all of us could use help in improving our spending." And then I looked at his profile, and he had 500 people who he was connected to. A lot of them were people in his church. And I looked at that, and I said, here is a person who I would not have run into on the street. Right? I would not have, just because of the circumstances of who we are and what we do, But I boosted this to someone. He was in the age group. He got the video, and he thought the video was good enough to share with his 500 followers. To me, that's power, right? That's the network working in a positive way. We can all find ways that we've networked, fake news and bad, but here's the network working to do something good. And then those people look at the video and maybe they change their spending habits a little bit. I don't know how much it improves the world, right? Mm-hmm. But I know that a little bit can sometimes tip people into behaviors that are much better going forward. Yeah.
It's kind of like that final needle on the back of a camel, right? Again, all very powerful insights. And I think there's so many intersections between us here. We could go, on and on and on. But I'm going to reserve some of my comments because I have so much to say. What is a fiduciary, and how would you describe a fiduciary's role in relation to its ecosystem and stakeholders?
Sure. A fiduciary takes a more holistic view, and there used to be that an investment was considered a prudent man rule, and that would be, would a prudent man invest in this idea or this concept or these securities? And then it's since grown into the idea of a prudent investor, meaning that an investor thinks of the whole portfolio and does the way the person is investing satisfy their overall objectives, and is it holistic and complete? I think that when I think about that, I think we can look at that and say, okay, there's risk and there's return, but I think if you take the next level up, you say, is this according to a person's values? Are you having this person who works, as a volunteer in a hospital, investing in things that promote smoking and, promote cancer and people to go, I think that there's a way for us to think as fiduciaries about things being more holistically good. And I think that that's where I hope that the market starts to move towards, because I think that there's always a lot of people interested in transactional business, right? And I think we need people to be more holistically oriented according to values and money, not necessarily, just money.
All right. Now, this one here is something that I think perplexes a lot of people. And I would argue even myself to this very day, because I haven't really seen a framework, and I'm sure it exists, of really determining, sort of people's financial prowess, or the literacy level and knowledge level. Just thinking about as a segue into this next question, thinking about the global financial system, right? So we've got the central parties, and then we have the banks, and then we have the non-banks, which are like part of the real economy and the financial system. To say someone is literate, financially literate, is something. If we have the financial system and talk about someone being literate, it kind of perplexes me, to say what the basic knowledge of financial literacy should be. So the next question is, what is financial literacy, and how does it support the financial system and well-being of citizens?
Well, what we tried to do is we tried to see where there was a gap in what I call the existing systems that exist. And so Atlanta has a pretty large group with junior achievement doing exercises in needy and low-income schools. And then they've also got Georgia Council on Economic Education, which does work with educating teachers on personal finance and economics. And so I looked at it and thought of the pyramid, right? If you think about the pyramid of the hierarchy of needs, right? And you've got a basic need to breathe and eat and housing. I think of us having a basic need for financial knowledge. And then I think as you grow, you need knowledge to get more complicated transactions like a mortgage and a lease, and then you get more complicated ideas on allocation and private investments, and then you go to what I'll call the pinnacle, which I thought of as a CFA or somebody with an advanced degree in finance knowledge, right? But I looked at the biggest gap in my mind is in that fundamental level. Because if you look at the society, the Fed has some statistics that, 40% don't have $400 for an emergency. 65% of the population in the United States doesn't have $1,000 for an emergency. And I look at the education system and say about 30% of the U.S. population has a college degree.
Can I interject a little bit and say then, in that case, it sounds like the pyramid is a bit of an understatement. Kind of looks like a vortex or a tornado.
Yeah, I think that there's a huge part on the ground that needs to be supplemented because the educational system doesn't include it in its criteria for knowledge. So therefore, it kind of gets added as part of economics and part of history, and it doesn't get the attention it should get. So what I did is I said to a group of 20, what I would call very smart people in the Atlanta Society, and I said, you all have all this knowledge and experience, and you've had families and brought up your children. I said, if you had an hour to spend with people you loved and cared about, what would you tell them so that they would be ready for their finances in the world today? And from that, we came up with 4 principles that we thought were core. Investing in yourself, investing for yourself, living with less, and managing risk. And the one thing that's a little different is we focused on investing in yourself because there was no money required. Invest in yourself in terms of your education and your knowledge. Invest in yourself in terms of your physical health. Invest in yourself in terms of your mental health through meditation and prayer. If you do those things, the number one cause of bankruptcy in America is a health event. And so when I looked across the population, I said, we think that these ideas, because we're in this industry, are all very simple ideas. But we have to look at the overall population. Like I said, 30% have a college degree. Of that, 20% are in business, economics, or some type. So that means that there's about 6% of the population that has been trained at a college level on these concepts. And I would argue that people graduating from business school are coming up to me saying, nobody ever taught me any of this personal finance stuff. I couldn't talk about it at home. I didn't know any of this until I came to your seminar. And so when we think about the whole of the population, if 6% have a college degree in some type of business, 94% have no formal training in this area. So how do we expect them to perform and make good decisions? I think it's, we have a huge need. And that huge need, I believe, will have to be leveraged through technology with online resources like we're trying to do with our Spanish videos and our English videos around, these 12 concepts or these 4 principles. So I think it's a huge problem. I thought it was something that if we brought people together, but then I realized there's really what I like to think of as 3 different segments of the population. There's what I'd say, if you think about it as a continuum of income, the 0 to 35th percentile is what I will call the fragile population. They don't have $400. They're looking at just to make ends meet. They're just looking to survive. They are fragile, and if they lose their job, they don't have there's no safety net outside of the unemployment. Then I'd say there's the 35th percentile to the 65th percentile, and that's what I would call the emerging. Those people are emerging. They're leaving the fragile state. They're starting to catch up. They're starting to save some money. They may have, they'd be in the process of getting a college degree or something. And then I'd say there's the developed. And those top 25 or 30% college graduate, 35% of the population has a 401k. These people are, in my mind, they're developing their financial acumen and their assets and their wealth. But the first 2 groups, they need a lot of help. And we owe it to them. To me, if I'm in that 6% working in the finance industry, I think we have to thoughtfully move the industry forward in how it helps the community and how it works with the community. And if it does, I think we then solve some of our problems with credibility and with trust. And that ultimately leads to a better community, and, rising tide lifts all boats. Does that answer your question?
More than satisfactory. I was just about to say that you actually painted a picture in my mind. because, like I said, I mean, I was struggling a little bit to actually determine. But you mentioned three things that really, I mean, no one can argue with this. The fact that you have to look at the Maslow's hierarchy of needs to really build out a pipeline that is coherent to the socioeconomics on the ground. And then obviously just taking, again, the data from the Fed, breaking, the wealth gap, or the Gini, the Gini coefficient, using actual data to determine, who's where and how pressing their needs are. And then you can provide them the education based on that as the basic type of education. So that is so spot on.
I mean, I think that, like I said, there's 12 main concepts we have. The ideas of investing in yourself are education, health, and, portion control and sugar, and then mental well-being. And we started talking about mental well-being, and we thought about whether we should include it or not include it, because it talks about the idea of prayer and meditation. And we started to realize there's a lot of CDC data showing that the number one stress that employees tell their employer about is worry about money. And so if you want to have a good employee, it's in your best interest that they have their financial skills in order so that they can not worry about their money and worry about doing a good job, right? And so I thought about the virtuous cycle of get people to be healthier, they're less likely to have health issues, and they're less likely to have medical expenses, and they're going to have more energy at work. And then they're, if they pray and meditate, and they're more likely at peace, and they're more likely to perform better. And then their educational level, if they improve their skills, they're more likely to be valuable to employers, and ultimately that causes them to be worth more, which causes them to be paid more, which causes their circle to start to virtuously move up. And the nice thing about that is I don't have to measure success as a balance sheet item. I don't have to say, do you have $700 now? Then you're a success. Or if you think about it, Tia, I think about the work done by different Nobel people, like Kahneman and Tversky in behavior, or Gary Butler in human capital. And I think that we've missed a huge opportunity. Businesses and governments understand the idea of human capital and how higher education levels lead to more GDP per person. Companies understand that they're a software company, and their assets go up and down in the elevator every day by the developers who control the knowledge and the ability to update that software, right? But at an individual level, do we think about the human capital of the average person? And how do we make that human capital? And understanding, college students that I talk to say, I'm so poor, I'm broke, I don't have anything. And I'm saying you have it all in your human capital, right? It's all about to be unleashed through the next 45 years of your earning power. That's all you transferring from your human capital to a financial, you're exchanging your time for financial assets, which you can then invest and grow. And then the curve starts to move up. And as you age, your human capital starts to decline. But if you continue to educate yourself, your human capital actually doesn't decline that much. And it might actually, your hours, your pay per hour might be actually rising. But the idea of human capital, and I said, you're worth more than any car, any house, anything you're ever going to own, because you've got all this potential. I was talking to students at Georgia Tech, and I'm like, you're going to make $100,000 when you graduate. And your career average earnings of $200,000 times 40 years, there's a lot of potential there, right? You say, I don't have anything. And I say, you've got everything.
So that to me kind of goes into, I feel like there's a lag of the world, moving from the mechanistic and manufacturing type of economy. I think that the idea of human resources versus human capital, like you said, it's when you talk about human resources, it's more about ones and zeros and kind of like balance sheet type of conversation, something that an accountant would apply, and again goes to the short-termism. But when you talk about human capital, the growth really is relative, and it brings that CFA type of mentality as well of saying, look, we're talking about value here, and value, if humans really apply themselves, there's no telling how much value there is out there, as opposed to just a finite system of ones and zeros, which is HR. Yeah.
Well, I think it's a new. I'm just amazed that he did this work in '70s. He got the Nobel Prize in '76. Gary Butler's ideas on developing economies and how if you educate the people more, they're going to be able to do more complicated tasks, and therefore they're going to produce more GDP per person, right? And since we want to increase the GDP of the whole country, the way you do it is by having those assets be able to work in more complex situations. And that's where I think you see what's happening with India and programming and what you see, in some of these various countries. And so I don't want to get too carried away. I could talk about human capital all night here, but I know we only got, I don't know how much more time we have.
All right. Well, we have 3 questions, so we're almost there. So the next one is, could we have a little talk about money and culture? Why is it so hard to talk about money and feelings around wealth and families? Does religion influence our feelings? How can we help with not only knowledge, but behaviors, since this is, a behavioral global economy?
I really think that Americans have this very, Judeo-Christian beginnings, and our purity work ethic, and our immigrants coming here to try to make their lives better, all make the idea of money, and it's really money in religion. The love of money is considered the root of all evil. And I think there's this conflict when people think too much about money. Are they misaligning themselves, or are they trying to maximize their value in such a way as they will have more alternatives to influence the world and do more for the world? Because I've heard people say, I can't volunteer time, Steve, but I can certainly give you money to help your cause because I believe in it. And I think that we have to first have a discussion. When we talk about an issue, we tend to do a better job on that issue. When we had the problems of teen pregnancies in the 70s, it became this vocal discussion that families and others started to have. And when families had these discussions, they were 80 or 90% less likely to have a teen pregnancy. So I look at money and the taboo around money. There's 3 or 4 things you don't talk about in social situation, right? Sex, politics, religion, and money. And I think that what we really need to do is to think of it more of, I think of values in money as different. And it's not, I'm talking about my money because I have a lot of it and I want to make you feel bad. It's how do you think about your money and how do you think about your future and your legacy? I think that's where I am in my life, and that's where I think a lot of people are. And a lot of people like yourself thinking about your mother and what she did, and how does your work now and your work in the future going to have a positive impact? So I think it's about opening up to conversation. And I think we have to think about our circle of influence and try to express ourselves and follow people who are doing their good things. There's a lot of people doing great things in this space. And that's where I think all of us need to champion and and shout from the mountaintops when we see someone doing something good. Because guess what? I think there's plenty of evil and the bad news out there, right? So the more we take things and highlight them and speak them on social media, I think the more we're permeating the idea that there is good. And the more we do that, I believe the Dalai Lama, broke down all of organized religion and churches into one word: kindness. I just believe that we need to emphasize kindness in how we treat our families, how we treat our friends, and how we treat others in the community. And if we show an example of kindness, I think that a lot of other people will follow that example.
This is something that I also sort of think very deeply about, especially in the behavioral economy. Because the truth of the matter is, even though we may talk about, all of the bad news that's being propagated, but at the end of the day, markets, they kind of feed the end consumer. And at the end of the day, it's something that's still very much innate within us, to kind of desire things that are ultimately sort of distasteful. I guess it also has to do with our DNA, and the fact that, especially even being a parent or as a leader, you always have to be on the lookout for the negative stuff, because you're like a watchman, right? Standing guard. And I think it's that type of, how do we say this? It's really difficult to resolve. I am all for good news, trust me, and I always try to think about even building apps where we can build, economic incentives for people to propagate good news or good acts. But I think also there's this huge challenge that has to do with our biological sort of disposition that's just really wired to want to find out where the next problem is, especially when you're a caretaker, XYZ. I mean, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that I'm a manager of risk with derivatives. So I've spent all my time looking at the markets of where it can go wrong and how it can go wrong and how do I hedge that. And I think as a society, we are constantly, kind of look for an edge, and we're trying to figure out if somebody's taking advantage of us. And I think that caution and diligence are needed. But I guess when I was thinking about it more in terms of the way that money is viewed by many is a negative, in that if we don't talk about it, maybe it will work its way out. And I think that's a naive approach. I think that naivete and some of their religion, the way we talk about money, is not necessarily appropriate. I think we should be opening up ourselves as examples and talking about our failures and our successes, not just one. I think that telling people how I failed when I, got a lot of debt and after I got off my first house and bought a couch and, 60-day layaway, and I got sick when it was due to pay, and I ended up paying all the interest. Those types of mistakes, I think, are helpful to people. So yes, I think there's a certain analytical part of what you should be doing that should be looking at the positive and the negative. But I guess what I'm saying is I think that in the industry, there's a lot of people who know a lot about the inadequacies of the markets and the inadequacies of the systems and the environments and platforms. And if those people shared with people how to work positively and move forward in a good way for their for their economic best interest, I think a lot more people would appreciate that, and a lot of people would then have more respect for us in this industry.
Yeah, that's another one that could, just spark a 5-hour conversation. I can definitely agree with you on what has to happen, but again, the markets will only reward people who have competitive advantages, or moats, as some people call it. So don't commodify your edge, because then you're going to lose your margins. Second to last, considering that data and other technologies like machine learning and blockchain are changing the fundamentals of economic structures, what changes would you prescribe for modern financial literacy courses?
Well, I think that everything is turned from a push information world to a pull, right? When you want to get something, you go onto Amazon and you pull it down. When you want to get something on YouTube and you want a video on a musician, you pull it. And I think that we have to make it easy for people to pull what they need to succeed. And so I think of the micro-lending model and how people needed small amounts of money in India and some of these developing economies, and providing them just a $5 loan was a huge benefit, right? And if you could figure out how to automate that, and they did, you could have a huge impact on some of these small communities, right? And I think of that model applied to financial literacy is what I would like to see, where we say, hey, you've got a cell phone now. Here's this free app. Here are some of the tools. Here are some of the things we'd recommend to you. How you can get started and how you can move yourself from 0 to 60. And that's what I see. The way that micro-lending took off as a concept, I would like to think about, the micro-financial literacy, meaning being able to bring to people who have a phone or have some method of communication the tools they need to learn, grow, and succeed.
So, as you were speaking, something came to mind, and that is the idea of search optimization. I think that there's a lot of opportunity, like you talk about micro lending and how automation there, just creates scale. Not sure if you've seen Mike Milken's formula, and I think when you search it on Google, it'll be, the Milken formula or something like that. Mm-hmm. But he just talks about how, exponential development, economic development, is only possible through fintech. And automation of microlending is certainly something that puts a microscope on Milken's concept. But I think one of the frontiers right now is the issue of with data mining. So if people, in these developing economies could understand how to optimize their use of characters and strings on these online platforms, then they can position themselves well. So what kind of keywords should you use on your Facebook business account, right? Mm-hmm. Because if people are looking to give you a loan and you deserve the loan, and there's a certain language that particular fintech algorithm is using to mine the Facebook graph. So I think financial literacy in this age could be, social media profile optimization, which is essentially SEO, if you want to talk about the World Wide Web, but on a particular social media platform. What kind of keywords should be using to position your business? So that's very powerful. Automation and microlending. I agree 100%.
Yeah, I think there's huge potential. I think we just have to have people dedicate to the localization of these concepts, right? because it's going to be different in Indonesia than it is going to be in China. It's going to be different, you know what I mean?
Exactly.
And that's where the 80% we can all agree on, it's that last 20 that takes that takes it to the next level.
Exactly. Well, moving on to the magnum opus of the podcast, the last question, Steve, is what elements of smart cities should local governments focus on to allow for happier and more fulfilling cities?
When I think about this, I think about parks and public spaces being the key to getting a healthy population and to having a sense of community. So I think it's really important that as communities develop, we think about that as a core and the center, and then the ecosystem builds around that. I think about integration of local healthy products from local farms and local people, that you're supporting local businesses and you're helping people who are, not traveling, their goods traveling, via a truck, 1,600 miles from Mexico, right? It's something that comes locally. It's going to have less impact in terms of how much to move it to market, where that's where a lot of the expense is in products. I think that having local professionals educate in the system, I think it's really important that we have people in different walks of life coming and talking to children at different ages, so that I think about a student coming to college today and they say, I don't know what to do. I have no idea. And I think that we just focus so much on the core knowledge and not enough on the applied. I mean, the applications of knowledge and how it works, if many people understood them, they would then start to pursue greater knowledge of that core, right? But I think that what we do is we have this all backwards, and that people end up in careers instead of moving to a career. And so I think that communities want to evolve. If this community, we want to think about a community as kind of like a portfolio. I break things down into portfolio construction. When I construct a portfolio, I think about how is it going to perform in different conditions, what are the growth assets, what are the core assets, what are the things that, how much income is it going to produce? How do we think about communities? And, is there a natural part of the community that is an asset? Is there is there a college in the community? Is there a good, the high school system, the career centers, the idea of applied education in terms of other skills, not necessarily in the academic realm. I think all of these parts come together to make your portfolio and your community strong.
Wow. And I must say, I've really enjoyed, listening to you speak. The engineering really comes out. I mean, the problem solving at, the ease at which delivering the answers is a revelation to me. And I hope it'll be a revelation to all of our listeners. I will certainly be adding, some of your insights on a few of the documentation I'll be putting together. And of course, the CFA, what a phenomenal designation. The way that you should apply, portfolio programs and projects in solving these big problems. And unfortunately, not a lot of leaders, have this type of education, or at least this way of thinking. Just from my own experience, talking to quite a lot of leaders in public service, I always wish they could have some type of really well-defined systems thinking, and again, breaking things into programs, portfolios, and projects as well. So thank you very much. It's been an absolute honor.
Each of us has so much to offer between our knowledge and our experience and any resources. But one of the things I think that was proven here in Georgia is that, the the ability to vote is a huge asset. And just like we talk about human capital, I think that we all have an impact that we can make without spending any money, just on how we take into consideration some of our values and try to incorporate that in our right to vote. And I think that, everyone has the ability to take someone they see on LinkedIn that has something good to say and share it with someone. Because in this time of COVID, I think there are a lot of people out there who've had a tough ride. And that ride, you don't know what's going to tip them towards a positive move forward or doing something well. And I just think we all have to try to be there to try to tip those people. The greatest journey starts with a step.
To a very exciting conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me.